The story of that rancher began on a dry and wind-scratched morning when the sun rose slow and red over the wide American frontier. It was the kind of day where the dust looked like it was floating instead of falling, and the air carried the quiet warnings of coyotes, storms, and secrets. People in that lonely land often spoke about destiny in ways that sounded like old church whispers, saying that a man could live his whole life thinking he knew his purpose, only to find out that everything could change in a single, unexpected moment. The rancher believed none of those tales, thinking they belonged only to campfire nights, to whiskey drinkers, and to those who had nothing better to do than talk about fate. He had built his life with his 2 hands, on soil that was stubborn, on cattle that needed discipline, and on a heart that had grown tired of loss. To him, the world was as clear as the shape of his rifle and the tracks. He followed across the wild plains. He lived alone in his wooden cabin near the rolling foothills, where the creek sang a soft note through spring and dried silent through late summer. His ranch stretched wide enough that no one could cross it without a horse or strong legs. He had no wife, no children, no brothers nearby, and his old parents were long gone, leaving him a land full of cattle and a home that was quiet enough for every sound to echo like a memory. Folks in the nearby town respected him because he minded his business, paid his debts, and kept peace. But they also whispered that his eyes had the look of a man who had buried dreams he would never speak of. The rancher did not consider himself lonely, yet some nights he felt something missing, like a chair pulled out from a table that was once full. The season had been hard, with coyotes growing bold and cattle going missing near the tree line where shadows seemed thicker than the branches. The rancher cleaned his rifle, saddled his horse, decided to ride out alone to track whatever creature had been troubling his herd. He was not a man driven by anger but by duty, and hunting was just another part of ranch work. It's the same as mending fences, hauling hay, or checking water troughs. He packed light, tied his rope to the saddle, and followed faint tracks that led deeper into the wild where travelers rarely went. He had no idea he was not the only one watching those tracks. By noon he reached a part of the land where tall trees stood like silent guards. The wind carried the smell of pine and wild berries. He stopped to study the broken twigs, the fresh marks in the soft earth, and a strange pattern that looked nothing like the prints of wild animals. He found a piece of woven material caught on a branch, decorated with dark beads that glimmered in the sun. He had seen such pieces before during trade seasons, and he knew right away it belonged to someone from an Apache tribe. His breath slowed as he realized he might not be hunting a wild animal at all, but someone skilled, silent, and more familiar with the land than him. Still, he kept moving, unsure if curiosity, caution, or stubborn pride guided him. Hours passed, and the forest grew thicker. Every step felt like stepping into someone else's territory, where the rules were older than his ranch, older than the town, and older than the fences people tried to hammer into place. He moved slow, listening for any sound. But what he heard only made him more aware that the forest was alive, and he was nothing more than a visitor. A snapping sound came from behind, quick and sharp. The rancher turned, not out of fear, but trained instinct. His hand tightened on the rope rather than the rifle, for his heart did not want blood. Behind a tree trunk, he caught a glimpse of movement, fast like a deer, but with human shape. He called out, telling whoever it was that he meant no harm. But there was no answer, only a soft rustle that signaled quick steps moving away. When he finally caught what he had been tracking, it was not through force, but through patience. He noticed a barefoot print near a creek, and knew he was close. The sun dipped, shadows grew longer, and he worried nightfall would leave him blind in unknown territory. He placed his rifle aside to show he was not hunting a person, and used only his rope, planning only to stop whoever kept watching and slipping away. When she finally appeared, she held a hand-carved spear and stood tall with a stare that felt like stone shaped by fire. She was young, dressed in traditional clothing that looked handmade, with braids tied by feathers. Her face showed strength and pride, not fear. She was not lost, and she was not running because she was afraid. She was tracking him on purpose. The rancher felt something shift inside him the moment their eyes met. She looked at him like she was reading every thought he carried but never spoke. He moved slow to show peace, but she stayed ready like a warrior raised on mountain ground. When she stepped back near the creek, she slipped on wet stones and lost her balance. In that single second, his body reacted without thinking, springing forward to grab her wrist before she hit the sharp rocks. She struggled, but fear crossed her eyes, and he gently tied her hands, only to stop her from striking or fleeing in panic. His rope was not tied tight, and his voice remained calm. He told her he would not hurt her, and that he only wished to know why she watched his land and cattle. She did not speak, but her eyes shifted between anger, fear, and something that looked almost like sorrow. The rancher wondered if she was alone, or if he had stepped into a path that did not belong to him. The forest around them grew darker, and the creek water turned silver as the last light faded. He stood there, unsure what to do next, unsure if he should release her right away, or wait until she understood that he had no cruel intent. She finally whispered a few quiet words in broken English. Something about danger, something about others watching, and something about a truth he was not ready for. Before he could ask what she meant, a branch snapped in the dark beyond the creek, followed by the faint sound of another figure stepping closer. The rancher felt his heart pound as he turned toward the shadows, knowing he was no longer alone and that capturing her was only the beginning of something far bigger than hunting cattle thieves. He did not yet know that she would change the path of his life, test his beliefs, and reveal secrets about the land he thought he owned. The wind turned cold, the night thickened, and the next moment would decide whether he remained a hunter, a prisoner, or something entirely new. The rancher kept his body still while trying to figure out the direction of that sound. Yet his thoughts were turning wild like a runaway horse. He had only tied her so she would not strike him or vanish without understanding his intent. But now that another presence lingered in the shadows, he wondered if he had just stepped into a trap. The Apache woman breathed deep through her nose as if warning him to stay ready, and even with her hands bound by a loose knot, she stood straight like someone who never accepted defeat. He wanted to ask her about the danger she mentioned, but the voice in his head told him that silence was wiser than curiosity at that moment. The whisper of grass and branches continued, and it felt like the land itself held its breath to see what would come next. When the sound faded, leaving only the creek and the forest wind, the rancher decided to move slowly toward his horse while taking her with him. He told her he would loosen the rope once they reached safer ground. But she did not answer, only looked straight ahead with a solemn face. He could see she was not weak or helpless, but trained and aware, and he regretted tying her even though he had done it for protection more than control. As they walked away from the creek, he sensed that the danger had not passed, but had only paused, like a wolf waiting for the right moment to strike. He kept his rifle slung on his back instead of pointing it, just to show he was not eager to harm anyone. The woman looked side to side as if she knew every tree, every shadow, every hidden trail better than any map or compass by the time they reached his horse. The sky had turned darker and colder. The rancher helped her mount only so she would not stumble on hidden roots in the growing night, then climbed behind her, holding the reins tight. As they rode toward his ranch, he could feel how tense she was, like a wild hawk forced to sit on a branch instead of flying free. He wanted to break the silence, to learn who she was and why she had been near his land. But he feared that too many questions could close her heart even more. When the cabin lamps came into sight, she looked at it with confusion, as if she did not expect a man living alone to keep it so ordered and quiet. He stopped outside, untied her hands slowly and stepped back, giving her space to understand she was not his prisoner. She rubbed her wrists and stared at him, but rather than run, she stood still, trying to read his next move. He opened the door, lit a small oil lamp, and motioned for her to sit inside where it was warmer. She studied the doorway like it was more than wood and hinges, like she was deciding whether stepping through it would change something sacred. At last she entered, moving with grace and caution. Inside, she saw the simple items of a working man: a heavy coat hanging by the wall, a saddle placed near the corner, a table with dried meat, a pot, and a Bible with worn edges. She sat near the table, but did not touch anything, keeping her back straight and her eyes alert. The rancher warmed some water and handed her a tin cup without getting too close. She smelled it first, then drank a little. He sat across from her and finally asked her name. She hesitated before speaking, telling him something short, soft, and filled with meaning, a name that spoke of mountains and old tribes. He repeated it quietly to show respect. She then looked down, as if speaking her name in the home of a stranger carried an unseen weight. He told her that his land had been disturbed, and he wished to understand why she was near his cattle tracks. She explained her English was not strong, so she used few words. But from those words he understood that she did not hunt cattle for meat or trade. She had been watching because she feared something else was moving through the land. Something dangerous even to her people. He asked what kind of danger, but she told him it was not her place to speak fully yet. He noticed pain in her eyes that was more from memory than the rope. She said she had lived through a harsh season where hunger and loss surrounded her people. Some had gone missing, and tracks were found near the same area where his cattle had disappeared. She mentioned that not all dangers in the forest moved with fur or howls. Some dangers carried fire, metal, and words that tasted like lies. The rancher listened and felt a weight settle in his chest. Knowing her words were not spoken lightly, she asked why he lived alone, and he answered with honesty. He told her he had once believed he would build a family, but life had worked like a storm he could not control. People he cared for had left this world sooner than expected, and he had stayed because he could not walk away from the land that held his past. She listened silently, and even though she did not touch him or speak comfort, he felt a small sense of peace simply because someone finally heard him without judging. Before she could share more, another sound echoed from outside, this time sharper than before. The woman stood instantly, her hand reaching for a wooden spoon as if it were a weapon. The rancher looked out the window but saw nothing except darkness and a faint rustle in the tall grass. He tried to assure her they were safe inside, but she told him safety was never certain in land claimed by more than one heart. She warned him that she should not stay long because if someone followed her, it could bring trouble to his home. He told her the door would not be locked and she was free to leave if she wished. Also said she could rest if she needed shelter. She stared into the fire as though every flame was a memory she could not erase. She spoke about how some families in her tribe were forced to move far from their sacred land. She believed someone was trying to draw them away from the forest using fear, taking livestock or leaving signs to make them think wild animals or other tribes were the cause. She said those responsible did not move like hunters trying to feed families, but like men who wanted control over where people could live. Her voice shook a little when she said she had been sent to watch quietly, not to fight or steal. Hearing that, the rancher felt a strong pull of responsibility, because if someone was stirring unrest in the area, it meant his peace would vanish sooner or later. She asked him why he did not have guards or ranch hands, and he explained that he used to have workers. But life in the frontier was tough, and many men left to find mines, jobs, or new towns that promised a different future. He was used to working alone and did not fear it, but now he began to see that a man could be strong and still unprepared for unseen trouble. Time passed inside that cabin with only the fire making gentle sounds. She finally asked if she could sleep on the floor near the warm corner, and he nodded, giving her a folded blanket. He sat on the other side of the room, neither sleeping nor staring, just thinking deeply about what her presence meant. He wondered if she trusted him or if she was only waiting for dawn. He also wondered if whoever followed her was still out there, watching the ranch house through the cold wind as the night grew heavier. He remembered the feeling from the forest, the sense that more eyes than his were studying the land. The Apache woman closed her eyes for a brief moment, but kept one hand ready near her blanket, as if she had spent her life sleeping like a warrior. Outside, something moved again, not near the door this time, but near the fence post where his horse was tied. He stood quietly, heart steady but alert, realizing sleep would not come easy. He knew that whatever the truth was, it had not yet been spoken. And when morning came, it might bring answers, or it might bring something far more dangerous than questions. The rancher stayed awake long after the last. Logs settled into quiet embers. He rested his back against the wall, rifle nearby, listening for every distant creak, rustle, or shift in the cold wind outside. The Apache woman slept light, her breathing calm but ready, as if she could rise at the slightest wrong sound. He admired her strength, wondering what life had shaped her like that. She looked peaceful now, but her earlier eyes told a story of survival, loss, and duty. He had known many strong men and women in his life, but something about her strength felt different, like it belonged to the land itself, not just to a human body. When the first pale light pushed through the small window, he stood up and stepped outside quietly. The ground near the fence looked disturbed, not enough to show full tracks, but clear enough to say that someone had been there. His horse seemed unsettled, ears tilting in different directions, tail flicking in colder air. He crouched and found a few marks that looked like they came from moccasins rather than boots. His stomach tightened, because that meant someone had come close without trying to hide it too carefully. They wanted him to know they were near, but not enough for him to know who or how many. That kind of message was never friendly. When he returned inside, the woman was awake, sitting with her blanket folded neatly. She watched his face closely, reading his expression before he spoke. He told her that someone had been near the fence during the night. She did not look surprised, only more certain that her earlier words were true. She said her tribe had noticed changes in the land, strange movements, and missing people. And she believed the trouble was not just about territory, but about something deeper that outsiders wanted to control. She explained that some tribes had been pushed to leave their ancestral places with promises of trade, peace, or protection, only to learn that the promises turned into threats later. The rancher asked if she believed someone was trying to push both her people and settlers off this land. She said she was not sure, but she knew fear was the easiest weapon to control hearts. She warned that whoever was behind the trouble would not stop at cattle or quiet warnings. She also feared there were outsiders who knew enough about both communities to stir anger between them, making conflict rise without showing the real mastermind. He knew that history between ranchers, settlers, and tribes had always been fragile. Peace existed only when both sides decided to ignore old scars. If fear spread fast, everything he owned could burn to ash, and lives could be lost for no clear reason. He felt a heavy responsibility because his ranch stood between the town and some tribal paths, making his land the perfect ground for hidden plans. He offered her a meal, and she accepted only a small portion. She ate politely, watching her surroundings with steady discipline. After finishing, she surprised him by asking if he would allow her to check the land herself. She said she needed to see if the remains of last night belonged to her people, or if they were someone pretending to be them. He hesitated, not because he distrusted her, but because he feared for her safety. She insisted she understood more about silent tracking than he did, and if she did not go, the future could become unclear and dangerous. He finally agreed, telling her he would come too. But she shook her head and said his footsteps were too heavy for quiet travel. She asked for one item, a small knife, nothing more. He gave her one, sharp but practical. She stepped outside, closed her eyes for a moment, letting the morning breeze touch her face, then walked toward the trees with careful steps, vanishing like a shadow that blended with the land. The rancher waited with restless thoughts. Hours moved slowly as he tended the horses, refilled water, and checked his rifle again and again. Memories of his past flashed before him in broken pieces. He thought of his younger days when he still believed everything could be controlled with patience and hard work. He remembered losing someone dear, a woman he once hoped to build a family with, who passed away after a harsh winter. Since then, he had shut feelings away like locked chests, thinking emotions only weakened a man. Yet now he felt a stirring in his heart. Not romantic, but protective and respectful. As if he sensed this woman carried a key to something greater than his personal plans. Near midday, he finally saw her returning. Her walk was steady, but her eyes carried tension. She stepped into the cabin and said she found signs that did not match her tribe. The footprints looked like someone tried to mimic Apache tracking, but small mistakes told the truth. She explained that real tribal trackers would avoid stepping near open ground where prints could be seen clearly. She also found patterns of broken sticks placed in unnatural angles, meant to mislead. She said whoever planted those signs wanted ranchers and settlers to blame the Apache. He knew that type of trick could ignite sudden conflict. And once anger began, There would be no easy, peaceful path. He asked if she believed someone in the town could be involved. But she answered that the land had changed too much in recent years and there were many travelers, traders and land buyers coming through. She worried it might be someone who planned far ahead. Someone not from the tribe, nor from old settlement families. He decided he needed help and thought of the small town nearby where he sometimes bought supplies. He told her he would ride there at sunset to speak with a trusted elder, who knew local history and had good relations with both ranchers and visiting tribes. The woman looked uneasy at the idea. She warned him that showing her presence in town could spark rumors, tension, or even hostility. He agreed she should stay hidden near the ranch rather than be seen. As afternoon passed, she practiced small tasks sharpening tools, repairing a loose leather strap, and studying the land with silent focus. He noticed how she respected every item she touched, even those that belonged to him. She did not act like a stranger. She acted like someone who understood that everything around her held value. When the sky turned orange, he saddled his horse. She walked with him to the fence and stopped there without stepping farther. She told him to speak no details in public and not to show concern openly because someone might be looking for reactions. He promised he would be careful. The ride to town felt longer than usual, as if the land was holding breath again. When he reached the main street, everything looked normal on the surface, with people walking, horses tied outside, and smoke rising from chimneys. Yet he felt eyes watching more than usual. He went to the old general store, where an older man known for calm wisdom sat near the counter. That man had lived long enough to witness changes in both tribal ways and settler ways. The rancher spoke in a quiet tone, explaining only that strange movement had occurred, and he needed advice on how to handle tension before it escalated. The elder listened and warned that hidden enemies often act with patience, waiting for others to spark the fire. As they talked, a stranger he had never seen before leaned on the doorframe, pretending to browse but listening closely. The rancher noticed his coat looked too clean for someone living in the frontier. His boots looked new, without dust marks. The stranger lifted his head slightly, giving a brief smirk before stepping out silently. The rancher felt something twist in his chest and realized time was shorter than he hoped. Before leaving town, he bought a few supplies. But the silent stranger stayed somewhere nearby, unseen but not forgotten. On his way back, concerns swirled like dark clouds. When he reached home, the Apache woman was waiting near the edge of the trees, not the cabin, as if she was guarding instead of resting. She saw the worry in his eyes before he spoke, and he knew that the path ahead would demand more than survival skills. It would require trust between two worlds that had never truly learned how to trust, and somewhere beyond the hills, someone else was planning their next move. The rancher looked around the quiet land after sunset, sensing that every shadow now felt heavier than before. The Apache woman stood near the trees, her long hair moving with the wind, watching him with silent questions. He climbed down from his horse, led it to water, and then walked slowly toward her. Feeling the pressure of everything unsolved, settling like a storm on his shoulders, he told her about the stranger he saw in town, the way the man pretended not to listen. His clean boots, his strange smirk, and the quiet way he slipped away. The woman listened with narrowed eyes, then turned her gaze toward the dark ridgeline behind the ranch. As if expecting someone to emerge from it, she said danger was not approaching, but already near, hiding, planning, and waiting for the right moment. She warned that fear could destroy both sides faster than bullets if the wrong story reached the wrong ears. The rancher understood that even a single rumor could set the town against the tribe or the tribe against the town. In either way, he would be standing in the middle with nowhere to run. Night fell quickly, and a cold wind carried new smells from across the land. He lit a lamp inside, and she sat near the door, but refused to stay too close to the warm fire, saying warmth could make a person unaware of incoming danger. She sharpened the small knife he had given her, while he checked the rope, the rifle, and even the small windows. He felt unprepared for a battle he did not know how to fight because it was not a battle of weapons, but of truth, territory, and hidden intentions. They whispered quietly, planning how to find real evidence before anyone forced a fight. She told him they needed to search deeper into the forest at dawn, Not at the creek this time, but farther where no rancher or trader usually traveled. She believed that if someone was trying to move like Apache hunters, they needed a hidden campsite or a place to store supplies so they could continue creating fear. He agreed, but insisted they take food, water, and his rope. Because dangers in the wilderness did not care for bravery or good intentions. When dawn painted a cold silver light across the plains, they moved together. She led the way, silent and alert, while he followed with steady steps, matching her pace. They crossed rocky ground, thick bushes, and narrow paths, stopping often to listen. She pointed out signs he would have never seen. Small stones placed in a pattern, burnt pieces of wood hidden under leaves, and faint cuts on tree bark for marking directions. Yet she also noticed wrong signs, like footprints too large or too deep, or from someone who walked with stiff legs, unlike tribal trackers. The farther they went, the stronger he felt they were being watched, not by animals, but by someone who wanted them to keep searching. It was like walking inside a trap that smiled quietly, waiting. When they reached a slope of scattered rocks, she paused, raised her hand, and motioned him to stay low. A smoke trail rose in the distance, almost invisible unless someone was trained to look for it. That smoke was controlled, small, and hidden behind heavy brush. They crawled forward. Moving slow, careful not to snap branches or kick loose stones. As they got closer, they heard faint voices. The rancher could not understand the words, but the woman shook her head, whispering that it was not her tribal language. She then pointed toward the small clearing where 3 figures sat near a fire. They wore mixed clothing, part rancher style and part tribal style, faces covered by cloth-like riders trying to stay unknown. One of them held what looked like a map, another cleaned a rifle, and the third sorted pieces of fabric that looked just like the woven beadwork she found. Earlier near his ranch, the rancher felt his heart pound with anger. Realizing the truth was far darker than stolen cattle, these men planned to disguise, blame, and stir fear, creating hatred between both sides so they could take land while everyone else fought. The Apache woman placed a hand near his arm, warning him not to move recklessly. She whispered that they needed proof, not revenge, because proof could save peace. While revenge could end everything, they backed away quietly. Careful not to be seen, and once far enough, both breathed deeper. Though tension still held tight, she said they must watch longer to learn the full plan. But the rancher worried the men might strike that same night, or before either tribe or town heard the truth. He wanted to confront them, but she told him confrontation without a plan was like running toward arrows blindfolded. They returned to the ranch with heavy thoughts. The sun dipped low, and the land grew quiet again. He paced near the door, struggling to find a way to expose the truth. She knelt near the ground, drawing small shapes in the dirt, thinking. She told him they might need to send a message to her people first, warning selected elders secretly, not the entire group, because panic could spread too fast. He said the same needed to be done for the town, but only to those who were steady-minded and respected. Before they could decide, a sudden whistle sounded from the trees. She stood, her body tense. 2 tribal figures stepped forward, spears lowered, eyes fierce, but confused. They had followed her trail, believing she might be captured or harmed. She quickly explained that the rancher meant no harm, and that larger trouble was rising beyond them. The 2 warriors listened, but stayed cautious, telling her that some members of their tribe already suspected settlers of recent disappearances and were preparing for action if more signs appeared. The rancher felt a cold sweat roll down his back. He realized time was almost gone. He told them they must come closer to see the proof themselves. The warriors hesitated, but finally agreed to check the forest site at nightfall. The Apache woman warned that the men near the fire might move camps if they sensed danger, so they needed to be silent and fast. When night draped across the land, they set out again, this time as a small group, each step carrying the weight of fragile peace. The rancher carried his rope, but left his rifle strapped, knowing its sound could ruin everything. The 2 warriors moved like shadows, while the woman stayed between them, guiding with signs instead of words. Near the clearing again, they hid behind thick brush. The three men still sat around the fire. But now there were more supplies: rolls of fabric, tools, fake tribal symbols, and pieces of stolen ranch equipment. One man said in a low voice that the next stage would begin soon. And by tomorrow or the next day, both sides would accuse each other. Once fear arose, they planned to claim abandoned land and sell it to buyers waiting far away. The rancher clenched his jaw. Realizing how close they were to disaster, the tribe warriors looked shocked and angry, but the woman shook her head firmly, reminding them silently that acting too fast could ruin the chance to capture them alive. As they watched, one of the hidden men suddenly stood and turned his head as if sensing something in the dark. The group froze, breath locked, hearts racing. The man moved toward their direction, pistol ready, suspicious, and slow. One crack of a twig could reveal everything and force a fight. None of them were ready for. The rancher prepared to protect the woman if it came to that. The warriors gripped their spears, and she turned her face slightly toward him with steady eyes. Not afraid, but ready. The man took another step, stopping just feet away from where they hid, staring deep into the darkness, as if he could hear a heartbeat through the wind. The entire world felt silent, hanging between peace and war, truth and betrayal, survival and loss. And no one knew what the next second would bring. The rancher held his breath as the armed man stood only a few steps away, staring through the darkness with narrowed eyes. It felt like the whole forest paused, waiting to see if fear would explode into chaos. The Apache woman stayed calm, her hands still and steady, as if she could slow time by will alone. The warriors behind her gripped their spears tight, but she gave them a quiet look, reminding them that patience was stronger than panic. The hidden man glanced around once more, muttered something about coyotes, then turned back toward the fire. The tension slid away like ice melting, but no one moved until they heard him sit again. Only then did the rancher feel air return to his lungs. They slipped back from the clearing with the same silence they arrived with, turning to the ranch without drawing attention. The rancher lit a small lamp inside, and everyone gathered near the table, whispering so the wind would not carry their plans. One of the warriors said his tribe must hear what they saw, but the woman insisted they share the truth the right way, with shouts or threats, but through respected voices. She explained that if the tribe reacted with anger, the disguised men would get exactly what they wanted, and innocent people would suffer. The rancher agreed and said he would speak to trusted townsfolk in the same careful manner. He reminded them that truth needed calm hearts if it was going to protect lives rather than inflame them. They all decided to meet again in 2 days, but not at the ranch or the forest clearing. They chose a neutral place near a quiet riverbank where both town and tribe elders could speak. The two warriors left before sunrise so their tracks would stay unnoticed. When they were gone, the rancher and the woman sat by the fire and talked about how easy it was for lies to grow in lands already shaped by scars of the past. She said her people were tired of running, hiding, and defending their rights. And he said settlers were tired of fearing sudden attacks and losing cattle or homes. They began to understand that their lives were not so different, just shaped by different stories. For the next 2 days, the rancher worked with caution, feeding his cattle, checking the land, and preparing honest words for the meeting. The woman stayed hidden around the ranch, keeping watch like a silent hawk. At night, they shared simple meals and talked about small things like how different seeds grew in different soils, how children laughed the same no matter where they were born, and how good people were often separated by misunderstanding instead of truth. The rancher found comfort in her presence, not because she filled his loneliness, but because she understood the land the same way he did, seeing it as something sacred and alive. When the day of the meeting arrived, the rancher packed water, rope, and enough provisions for a long wait. They traveled through a long trail until they reached the riverbank, where smooth stones lined the shore. The tribe elders arrived first, dressed in traditional clothing that carried history and meaning. They approached with silent dignity, and behind them walked the same two warriors who had witnessed the hidden campfire. A short while later, 2 trusted townsfolk appeared, an older storekeeper and a local church leader. Men who held respect without needing loud voices. The rancher spoke first. Not as a landowner, but as a man who wanted peace. He told them about the stolen cattle, the planted evidence, and the hidden camp. Then the woman spoke about missing tribal people. Fake signs meant to cause blame, and how the disguised men mixed clothing and items from both groups. Her voice held strength, not to accuse either side, but to clear the fog that someone else placed between them. The two warriors confirmed what they saw, and the elders listened with serious, thoughtful eyes. The storekeeper shook his head slowly and said that fear was a dangerous seed, one that could grow into fire without anyone meaning to ignite it. The church leader agreed, saying that if both sides reacted too quickly, those hidden men would have gained everything they wanted. The conversation lasted long, but for the first time in many seasons, both sides spoke without anger and listened without suspicion together. They formed a plan to capture the disguised men without war, without yelling, and without blame. Tribal scouts and town volunteers would surround the forest clearing at night, using hand signals instead of gunfire. The rancher and the Apache woman would guide them through the right path. No one wanted bloodshed, only truth and safety. When night fell, they moved like one team, not two sides. The disguised men never expected unity and were caught by surprise. They tried to run, but skilled hands blocked their escape. They tried to fight, but outnumbered hearts with justice stood stronger. When caught, they confessed that they worked for distant land dealers who promised them reward if they created conflict. They were taken to town for rightful judgment. And both tribal members and settlers saw this as proof that distrust had been planted by someone who valued profit more than life or heritage. With danger gone, the tribe and the town agreed to stronger communication. They promised no rumor would be believed without proof. They agreed to share hunting and grazing routes so no one felt threatened. They even decided to meet every new season to speak openly, not to solve problems, but to prevent them. In the following weeks, peace returned quietly, not with celebration, but with steady trust. The rancher and the Apache woman spent more time together on the land, tending to horses, fixing fences, and teaching each other skills. She showed him how to read the sky for hidden weather signs and how to move silently over rocky ground. He taught her how to care for young cattle and how to build tools for daily ranch work. They shared long rides through the hills and slow walks near streams, talking about their future and how peace should be protected like water in a drought, little by little. The ranch cabin no longer felt like a place of loneliness. The woman added handmade items, small crafts carved from wood and decorated with beads she made herself. He built a small garden behind the cabin, and she planted seeds gifted from her tribe. The mornings were no longer silent, but filled with the soft sounds of shared chores, and the evenings glowed with warm conversation. With time, they grew close, not because of fear or rescue, but because they respected each other's spirit, values, and courage. They never erased their differences, but treated them like colors in the same sunset, blending but still unique. He thanked fate for leading him into the forest that day, and she thanked destiny for bringing her to a man who saw beyond borders. Their story became known as a tale of unity, strength, and understanding. People repeated it across the frontier, saying that peace came from brave hearts, not strong weapons, and that love could rise even where distrust once grew like wild grass. In the end, the ranch was no longer just a piece of land. It became a symbol of hope, where two worlds walked side by side. The rancher was never lonely again, and the Apache woman found a place where her spirit could stay free, proud and loved, and the land, wide as the sky above, carried their story forward like a soft wind through the valley, whispering that peace was always possible when people chose truth instead of fear.